list. So I think there's an opening at the horizon. The question is, are we able to muster, to put together those ingredients in a formula that will allow us to develop? And I conclude on that, there are a few good signs. You mentioned that half of the fastest growing economies are in Africa. So development policies, when it is at the catch-up level, and most 95% of low-income countries are in Africa. It's the last frontier of development. It's not very complex. It's a big push in terms of investment, stability, as I mentioned, and this is where comes the African Development Bank. I think we need to multiply its size rather than trying to reforming the international finance as something. It's important, but we have an institution in Africa. Let's make sure it works. If I take agriculture is, for Africa is a no-brainer. Given what's happening on food around the world, there's another one. You take Morocco, we're number one in fertilizers, for instance. It's an African company. And gas, there's gas everywhere offshore in Africa. Everywhere, almost, it's been discovered. There's a long list of assets, but the thing is, where's the magic? And you're searching for the magic here in India. And it's innovation, DPI, and you're sort of thinking at the margin. It's a try and error process. It's complex. Development is a complex process. It has, of course, political dimensions. But I think at the horizon, I see light, and this is reinforced by this daily contact we have with students, thinkers, that are not looking at the world as we are. They are really, they feel they have agency. And I don't think it happened right after the independence days in Africa in the early 60s, where there was this, passion for development. I think we're in a way back to that. The theories of development of the 50s, the big push in investment, etc. It's again in the agenda. I'll come back if you want in the second row on the relations with our friends in advanced economies and how can we sort of try to find something that is more fruitful for both of us. Thank you.
So outside you had mentioned to me when we were discussing that it is looking at Africa through a new pair of glasses. I just wanted to bring that up. I think it's a timely reminder. Minister, we actually have about 10 or less minutes before we open it up to the audience, and I know that there are a lot of people keen to interact with you. So to begin with you, one quick follow-up question, which was again the sort of, Africa's voice in geopolitics and internationally has been changing as it has become a participant in multilateral fora and just has started asserting its voice so much more. Where do you see the role of alternate coalitions and platforms as we are seeing the multi-alignment take place through the world? What will be Africa's approach to this?
Thank you. Indeed, Africa is 1.5 billion people, but we are not at the table of many international organizations. We don't have a permanent seat in the UN Security Council, while more than 2/3 of the items discussed are African conflicts, and there is also a lack of representation in Bretton Woods institutions. But it's good now that Africa is a member of the G20. But what we need as Africans is not just to have a place at the table. It's to have influence. And to have influence means that we need, first of all, have economic depth, have strong economies, integration, the transformation, everything that I was saying before must be done in order to back our seat with credibility. And we believe that as we say that Africa is rising, it's really critical for Africa to have influence in international organizations. And when we see what's going on in the world, it's happening in the north. The 4 economic and military blocs, US, EU, Russia, China. So discussion is not about Africa. Yet we matter. We are arguably the richest continent with our natural and human resources, and we need to keep on reforming ourselves, working on our governance, ending conflicts, and also being sure that we keep on having this voice at the table of international organizations to bring our perspective as Africans on how the international world order should go on. But I believe, I'm optimistic, and believe that as we have been reforming, as we have been going on the path of more integration, we will eventually have a good place on most international institutions that matter in this world.
Indeed. Secretary, you had mentioned the potential of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Of course, it is the largest free trade area in the world, and with huge potential and ambition. How far do you think it has been able to meet Africa's development needs through African solutions?
Well, I think we have not gone so far yet, but one of the most important things that I can point out is that if there was an instrument that received the fastest approval and accession on the African continent, was the Africa Continental Free Trade Area in record time. So clearly there's a vision, a clear understanding by all countries that this is the way to go. But any institution, any multilateral institution or framework is as good as the countries that make it. So if we want to have a strong multilateral arrangement, then it is clear that the strength of our individual countries and the order and the organization must be paramount. This is what we will carry over into the multilateral institution or into the continental institution. So we need then to break away from lip service to actualization. If we talk of the 54 countries, and I was listening to my colleagues here, these are 54 countries with 54 currencies. Now, India is 1.5 billion people with the rupee. Then the rupee, you can deal with the dollar, you can deal with other currencies. But on the African continent, the fact that we have 54 countries, all with their own currencies, all with their own individual central banks, then you can see the magnitude of the challenge that we have. We really have to embrace what the Africa Continental Free Trade stands for. We need to get infrastructure that cuts across. We find a lot of our African countries, they would have to go to Europe to connect, to go back to Africa, if they were flying and so forth, or to go to the Middle East and then connect and go back. But lessons, it's as if something is beckoning us, telling us that this is the time. Take advantage of the challenges that are in place. And therefore, I would really want to say that if we look at it, we are growing systematically. It's projected that maybe we'll have about 7.7% growth of internal intra-trade in Africa. But that is not enough. And clearly also the markets that we have always been used to, the European Union and others, are actually being overtaken by the Asian nations. India, China are becoming the dominant trading partners for the continent. So there's a lot of recalibration that needs to take place. But the window of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area should not be shut. We should take advantage of it.
So, Secretary, you mentioned two very critical things that would make this happen, and one is infrastructure and connectivity. And for that, the requirement is always capital. So, when we think about Africa, given the potential that it has, the capital has remained underdeveloped. What sort of structural reforms do you think are needed to unlock domestic capital for critical issues like infrastructure connectivity?
Thank you. When I was listening to the Secretary, I was just going through that in my mind. We have always been very leveraged or very dependent on foreign debt coming in. And the reforms that I think and which we are seeing gradually coming into place are four. The first one is relying on local currency bonds and treasury bills. Countries have to be able to raise money internally by relying on the capital, the funds that they have from the depositors in the population. So treasury bills, government bonds is a key source. The second would be specific bonds, sustainability bonds, like what we see countries like Benin have done one. You see banks like EcoBank have raised gender bonds in Cote d'Ivoire. We have raised sustainable bonds also in the foreign markets. So specific bonds are very important as we look at what are the key SDGs that can be financed for us in our countries. The third would be the regional integration measures that were mentioned, the West African Economic and Monetary Community, the CEMAC zones, where they come together, again, like my colleagues on the other side were saying, where countries come together to focus on a key need, whether it's bringing the stock exchange markets together so that they become bigger and stronger, whether it's having one central bank like the Central African countries have. The 6 countries have one central bank, so decision making is easier. They have one regulator, so speed to market on certain products and services can be easier. So that regional integration is very critical. And the fourth is co-creation. The commercial banks or the governments should continue to work with multilateral institutions to raise funds. So work with the African Development Bank, work with other institutions that can support us in the development initiative. So I think these 4 things, if we can do them and be very consistent and have a unified vision of what we hope to achieve, I think we will be able to have additional sources of capital for the development of the countries in which we live in.
Right. Those are actually very concrete 4 ideas that you've laid out. Before we open this up to the floor, Karim, I'm going to ask you to zoom out a bit and refer to the title of the session, which is around priorities. And if you can tell us what should be the top priorities for Africa in 2026. Not the entire list, maybe just 2.
So that's a very short term. I think, like most countries, where many countries are facing difficult balancing act in terms of their policies. Debt is quite high in many countries, so you have pressures on the fiscal policy, and you have also pressures on the fiscal because of increased defense spending. Defense spending are increasing in Africa as they are increasing all around the world. At the same time, you have also the scarcity of all the crises that have accumulated over the 2010s, and the last one being the COVID, and it's still showing in fiscal balances. So I think it's not easy, and you have to, of course, free up resources for long-term development. So there's a sort of a very complex balancing act that you have to, and again, it has a little bit of maestria, it has a little bit of institutional robustness, and this is played at the country level. This is not played at the African, level. So I think it's a challenging environment, but as I said, I think there are more opportunities if you're able to insert yourself in global value chains. You take a country like Morocco in the automobile. Today we're producing 700,000 cars. And in the aeronautic sector. So, and there are other examples of the capacity to integrate yourself in the value chains. But that takes a lot. You need to have reliable electricity, you need to have all sort of things around it and infrastructure. So what I would say is that managing short-term challenges and preparing for the future, that's the challenge on the table of most policymakers in Africa. And thank God they're not sort of, and some countries, of course, are managing, wars, like, internal disruptions, like Libya and a few others. Sudan is another case in point. In the Sahel, there are sort of more urgent needs to be dealt with, and I hope that this is where we expect the African Union, for instance, and Africa as a continent to come together to be able to solve that. So I think it's as I said, it's a tough year, but it's a more open world. So work on yourself and trust your younger generation. Give them the space. They have something you don't have. The average age in this room is maybe, would you guess? Average, above 40.
Yes.
Okay, so the median age in Africa is 19 years old. That's close to the Indian one. So I think give them the space. They have energy, it's one of the three things you need to be successful: energy, being smart and intelligent, and integrity and the values. So I think that's part of the psychological dimension that has to evolve. There's a psychoanalysis of public policies and the weight of history. And this we don't have time to talk about that. But Africa has a special place in the world and in its history. So but I think for the first time there's the environment, the space, the people, the younger generation to overcome that. So I'll be pretty optimistic. Thank you.
All right. So a tough balancing act, but as you said, the space is open, and one of the ways to get there would be to trust and invest in the youth. So I'm now going to invite actually our young fellows to perhaps address our speakers with their questions. We can start with them and then widen it up to the room. You can walk up to the mic and ask your question. Okay, so we'll start with this part of the room and then move there. Yes.
Hello.
Sorry, I'm going to briefly introduce yourself and keep it concise.
Yes, thank you. My name is Rafael. I'm from Brazil. I'm participating in the Young Fellows Program. Thanks a lot for all your thoughts on this African panel. My question is about Brazil, Latin America, and African international relations. 2026 is an important year for Brazilian foreign policy. We're celebrating the 40th anniversary of the South Atlantic Zone for Peace and Cooperation, the ZOPACAs, which basically include all of the African countries south of Cape Verde, Argentina, Uruguay, and is headquartered in Brazil. We are also celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Portuguese-speaking countries communities, headquartered in Praia, Cape Verde as well, and include, several African countries, Brazil, Portugal, and so on. And we had recent developments between Brazil and Africa, notably the AU, the African Union, joining the G20 during Brazil's rotating presidency in 2024. And of course, a very significant African diaspora in Brazil, a historical African diaspora in Brazil. My question is, what is next? Is there room for more robust and concrete cooperation on trade, on financial integration and trade routes, commercial ties between Brazil, Africa, and Latin America in a more broader sense? Thanks a lot.
Who is that for?
It's for everyone in the panel, but maybe since we talked about South Atlantic and Atlantic relations, more directed to the representatives of Cameroon and Morocco.
Correct.
Thanks.
You. We'll take one more question from this side of the room.
Hello, my name is Amanda Etuk. I work for an accelerator/impact fund focused on supporting entrepreneurs, particularly in Nigeria. My question is for Ms. Abunao of EcoBank. Most of the innovation and enterprise in African countries, especially mine, is driven by the private sector. As someone who sits at the intersection of capital and entrepreneurship, is the primary hurdle truly a lack of accessible, available capital? Or is the political risk the premium that keeps interest rates high and scares off the long-term institutional investment truly needed for transformation?
Okay, let's have one more question from the back of the room.
Should I just...
Yes. Is there someone?
What's next one?
Can we have a mic there, please? If you can keep it very brief.
Greetings to the panel. My name is Ansh. I am presently a master's student from Kotalia School of Public Policy. So my question is directed to the Honorable Secretary from Kenya, particularly around the currency matter. Like, I am aware that there is a Pan-African payment and settlement system which is operating in around 14 countries of the African Union right now. So could this potentially be expanded, or is the African Union looking at a model like the European Union's model of a common currency, or are there any complications when it comes to that? If you could shed light on that. And within this Pan-African payment and settlement system, how is the African Union looking at expanding its access to all the 54 member nations?
Okay, so we're just going to take a couple of more questions from our Raisina Young Fellows.
Good afternoon, and thank you to the distinguished panelists. My name is Amandla Ndisi. I'm from Kenya Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the 2026 Raisina Young Fellows Program Leader, and thank you to Dr. Karim and Adele alumni too. My question, given a lot of the conversations that we've been hearing as the Young Fellows throughout the last few days, is really mainly about, as African countries that are still grappling with fundamental development priorities such as infrastructure, education, poverty reduction, and peace and security. At the same time, emerging technologies like quantum computing are shaping the future of economic and geopolitical power. In a global context where recent geopolitical shifts have highlighted the risks of dependency, whether on aid, energy, or technology, how can Africa balance its immediate development needs with strategic investments in frontier technologies to ensure the continent is not left behind and can help shape the technological future? And this question is to the two foreign ministers. I thank you.
Okay, do we have one more question?
Hello, I'm Gareth Ramsey from South Africa. My question goes to both the Cameroon and Moroccan representatives on stage. And specifically, Africa's population growth generally tends to lag its GDP growth and its economic growth. And this suggests that we're sort of moving backwards in real terms. So my question is, in your opinions, what is the most effective way that we can address these economic growth issues, given the very real constraints and hurdles that most African countries face when it comes to political instability or prioritizing political interests over the citizens or over the interests of citizens, and all of this tends to generally result in political elitism or a small group of wealthy individuals becoming very wealthy. This all results in slow policy implementation, lack of infrastructure investment and development, which perpetuates and prolongs these developmental issues we're facing as a continent. Thank you.
Okay, so those are lots of questions. what we can do is maybe ask each of you to provide your concluding thoughts. You heard the questions, they were around the broad themes that we have already discussed, and if we can take a minute each over those.
Thank you very much. African countries have been independent for almost 60 years. There are countries that regained their independence later, but we have been 60 years independent. But we are still on development aid. Yet we are actually the richest continent with the human and natural resources. So what we should be aimed to is to ensure that we reform ourselves in order to transition from aid to trade and investment. And this is what we should be doing in order to engage in the partnerships that we're talking about, including with non-traditional partners. We have been partnering with our former colonial powers after our independences. But now there are new emerging powers. There's India, of course. There's Brazil, South America. There's other partners that we can engage with in a sense of mutual respect and mutual benefit to ensure that we move from extraction to joint ventures, to skill transfers, to technology sharing, in order really to build the Africa we want. So partnerships are important, but also to work on our development path. Infrastructure was mentioned, which is a long project to link all corners of the continent and avoid these issues my colleague was talking about of connectivities on the continent. So the future is bright, but we need to work for it.
Thank you. I'll pick up the issue around the payment systems. We have started with fewer countries, but we need to broaden it. The sooner we do it, the better. Because we want to be able to leverage on technology to also allow the small trader somewhere in Zimbabwe to be able to get a payment from somebody in Morocco, if indeed there was reason for them to have some intellectual property exchange based on their technology. So this needs to be broadened. I also just want to emphasize that it would be ideal if we had a common currency, but it will take much longer to achieve that because, as we said, we have 54 countries, different levels of development and so forth. But using technology, we can accelerate the level of integration and allow them to trade much more easily. And that is what I think we should be going for, as opposed to maybe just sticking on the traditional ways. Because a currency, in my view, is not an identity in terms of your sovereignty. A currency is really a medium of transacting. And I think this is the message that we need to get across, that what we want is to enhance more transactions on the African continent, and we are not challenging the sovereignty of these states. So this is the message that we need to keep pumping. I would also just want to quickly say that in terms of infrastructure, it is clear we are not going to get the kind of aid that we used to get. So as a continent, we must embrace the private sector, the partnership with the private sector. We should not look at the private sector both in-house, that is in the country, in the continent, and external private sector as an opposition. These are partners coming in to work with us to be able to grow our economies. And therefore, in Kenya, for instance, we have now realized that to do better in terms of our infrastructure development, we have now launched, through a legal process, through Parliament, to have an infrastructure fund where the proceeds of our privatization, where we privatize state corporations, we reserve these resources within the infrastructure fund, and then we leverage on it to get more international capital to do our infrastructure, but more on private sector. And in terms of the mineral wealth, we are now moving, borrowing from countries like Norway and others. We want to be able to have a sovereign fund so that the resources that come from our rare earths, the resources that will come from our gold, our cobalt, and so forth, can also be invested in this through this sovereign fund with a proper legal framework anchored in law, and then having the capacity to also engage with the international financial markets. This is the way that we are going to look at our future growth.
Thank you, Secretary.
Ultimately, technology. It must always be part of it. Thanks.
Gwen.
Okay, I will try to just give it in point form for the interest of time. The question on the interest rates for entrepreneurs. What we have to remember is that most of our countries have short-term capital, so the cost of funds is high. That's why the interest rates remain high. So the important point for us is to find ways to diversify the source of funds, because most of the population in our countries are not banked. They are not in the banking circle. So the access that the banks have to funds, be able to lend, is limited. So it rises up the cost. But that's why digitalization is very key. That's why we have to look for those who are interested in angel financing, those who are interested, to finance fintech. Those types of non-traditional source of financing is what is going to help us to reduce the interest rates. And it's very critical because with the youth bulge that we have, as we're saying, if we don't have multiple sources of financing to foster this entrepreneurship, we will be short. The last point I just wanted to say was on the payment systems. The point of PAPS is very critical because there are few banks that are actually plugging into this. And if we all have various currencies, various payment partners, and we don't federate our actions, we are not going to see the trend, the scale that we have.
Right.
So we have to find a way to federate, first of all, to have financial sovereignty, and to have also independence on the different types of payment sources that we have that will help us to scale.
Okay. Karim, the last word is yours, and I think we have 30 seconds.
Thank you. Very quickly, if I summarized a little bit the solutions that were implicit to the question, technology, financing, industry, trade, institution, property rights, SMEs, light manufacturing, infrastructure, education, governance. If you're the Ministry of Finance, where do you start? I mean, so I think what's your fabric of public policies? What's your factory where you develop your public policies, and what's your implementation capacity? How do you build consensus politically? These are reforms that are not neutral. That's what you need. You need the process. The ideas are around. So I think to respond to our friend and the Brazilian friend, well, we've been waiting for Brazil in Africa. So you will be welcome. There were attempts in the past. So I think Renato is here. I'm saying we've been waiting for Africa, for Brazil in Africa. So welcome. Thank you.
All right. Well, we can see that there are not only new ways of engaging with Africa, but also really new ways of thinking about it. I want to thank our speakers for bringing very invigorating thoughts to this discussion and making it as rich as it was. And thank you so much to all of you.
Thank you so much, Sunena, and of course all the speakers for joining.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Prime Minister of India, Mr. Narendra Modi.